We'll call to order this meeting of the Board of Selectmen for Tuesday, October 21st. We're going to start tonight with a moment of silence for Chris Lynch. Many people in town knew the Lynch family. Chris was the grandson of Bernie Lynch, longtime former member of our planning board and president of our Milton Access Cable Television. A couple of days ago, many Milton residents came together to take part in a walk and run to show support for Chris, who was courageously battling leukemia. The strong turnout was a tribute to Chris and to the entire Lynch family. And Chris's loss is felt deeply here at Town Hall, where he had many, many friends. So on behalf of all of the employees at Town Hall, we extend our deepest and heartfelt condolences to the Lynch family. And now the Board of Selectmen will observe a moment of silence in memory of Chris. Thank you. Okay, turning to the next item on our agenda, approval of meeting minutes for September 10th.
Move approval of the minutes for September 10th. Second that.
Any changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous. Let me ask the town administrator, do you want to move up the town planner?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to move the town planner up to address the one of the articles in the fall town meeting warrant.
Okay, welcome, Bill.
Hey.
The planning board is meeting at the same time, or is meeting shortly tonight, so we'll fit in. Bill, this is item number 10 on our agenda, and that's a discussion of all of the fall, or some of the fall town meeting articles. So, Bill, we'll start with you on the article regarding the landfill access road, which I believe is Article 6. And we may come back to this later on in the evening.
I've been asked a couple of different questions, and that is to identify which of the parcels we're talking about changing to municipal use. And I've given each of you a color map that shows the purple, which is 3.72, and the one that's in pink is 0.28 acres. Presently, both of these parcels are still listed as municipal landfill, and it is our intent to go to town meeting to get it changed, just the use on those two parcels to municipal usage. Now, some of the other questions that have come up since then is how did we acquire these parcels? Well, the reason the picture is so large is because you need to go on the other side of the road. When you take that purple and you bring it down, it shows that bigger 30-something acre lot, that parcel that particular trapezoid at the top belongs to. If you go to the triangle on the smaller one, that triangle sits on top of the other trapezoid that's right beside it. That is, so it becomes a total of 7.17 acres. Each of these parcels came from different families. I've also given you the assessor card that shows the history of lot I-38D8, which is the one that has the pink on it, which is the one that was called into question, that somebody thought that it came from a different purpose. It didn't. It was taken in a tax title. It was done in 1954, and I've given you the documentation to that from the assessor. The question on the roadway, I've given you the 1954 annual report, which actually says that we will be back before the Maytown meeting to change the usage of the road from municipal landfill to municipal usage. But this is how we access those properties anyways. I did talk with John Flynn, and we've gone through, preliminarily we've gone through this. We'll be doing it again in preparation for town meeting.
So Bill, just so I'm clear, because this is my first time hearing this, the roadway is zoned as municipal landfill?
We took the road for municipal landfill purposes, but we own the land. All the parcels that the road goes over, we own. for different purposes. It doesn't preclude us from using the road anyways.
Yeah, so I get the land part, that's zoned municipal land. But the roadway coming in, you said we're going to get that rezoned at a later date?
We'll do that in May.
So right now, it's zoned the same as the land?
Yes,
So how come we're not doing it all together?
because we didn't know that the road had its own separate designation. It came, and if you look in the articles from 1954, which are included here, Article 19 talks about the roadway itself. And the deed that's on the back of the piece you have actually goes in and explains the order of taking for the roadway.
So this information came up, Bill, in response to questions
Yep.
that have arisen regarding this article.
Well, I mean, that's a good question.
Yes.
Whoever asked it, so.
I mean, we knew we owned the road, it was just a matter of, the usage. We knew that it was created, we just didn't know how it was created. And it was 1954 town meeting that approved it.
I mean, it's just a shame that we didn't know it was zoned the same as the land before we got to town meeting.
Absolutely, but that...
Because now we got to go back, we got to go back in May, is it?
Yes, but,
And ask for the same thing.
right. But that's just for the road. It doesn't preclude us now from being able to plan to build on the 3.72 acre
Understood.
and the .28. I mean, ultimately, that was the bigger hurdle, is to get those two parcels so that we could use those to put the animal shelter on.
But why would you want to change the zoning of the road anyway? I mean, it's just a road, right? Would you need to change it?
Probably because there's no landfill purpose for it, for any of this
Right.
property any longer.
It's just cleaning it up, cleaning up the title.
We are going to come back to this. I think we're expecting Marion McGedrick, who represents the animal shelter,
Yes.
later on, but because Bill has to get over to the planning board. Is there anything more else that's specific questions we have for Bill? If not, we can take this up again later on. No? Okay, Bill, thank you for,
I'll try to get back, we'll see.
thank you very much. Okay, so we'll go back to our number 3 on our agenda, which is to confirm our future meeting dates. We're meeting on October 27th and 28th, Monday and Tuesday of next week. Town meeting starts at 7:30, so we'll be meeting at 6:30 those nights. We also need to add a meeting on November 5th, if both of you, or I'm available, or I think Paula was probably checking availability for everyone. Is everyone free on the 5th, which is a Wednesday evening? The problem with November is Tuesday, the 4th is Election Day, so we can't meet that night, and then the 11th is the Veterans Day. So we're going to have to schedule a Wednesday meeting,
Wednesday the 5th?
Wednesday the 5th.
Just check.
And that actually works well for our town council as well, who will be here if we can meet on the 5th. We did say previously that we would schedule a discussion of the letter we received from the Friends of the Yulin Rink, and we want town council to be here for that discussion. He's in town meetings, as he will be for our town meeting on Monday night. He's in town meetings for other towns during the next few weeks, so a Wednesday night would be the best day for him as
I'm
well.
available.
The only thing I have is the airplane advisory meeting that
On the
night.
5th?
On the 5th. I'll
What
see
time?
if we can change that.
What time is that meeting?
7 o'clock.
Oh, it is. Well, why don't we, maybe we can, see if it's possible, but if not, maybe on Monday we'll figure out another date that we can meet. We'll need to check with John as well.
Was that in your calendar, Emery, at all?
No,
No?
I don't attend that meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll work on scheduling, but at least we'll be meeting on the 27th, 28th.
Okay.
Okay. The next item is approval of payroll and vendor warrants.
I'll move approval of the current payroll and vendor warrants.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Citizen speak. Do we have anyone here to address the board at citizen speak tonight? And seeing none, we will go on to a public hearing. We have 2 matters on our agenda tonight with Sheila Gillis, who's here representing National Grid. NSTAR, I'm sorry, NSTAR. You told me that earlier and I forgot.
There are 2 motions. I will be recusing myself from the second one.
Okay, so we'll convene a public hearing under Section 22 of Chapter 166 of the General Laws. We have before us request from NSTAR to install conduit in Harlan Street and Walcott Road. So we have a representative, NSTAR. Is there any member of the public who wishes to be heard at the hearing? Then seeing none, Sheila, thank you for coming in and for joining us tonight. We appreciate your being here to answer any questions. Why don't we start with the Harlan Street property? We have a memo from our department. Yes, sir. Are you here?
Can I ask you a question?
Are you here on a...
With regard to this?
You should come up.
I mean,
Sir, why don't you come up so your voice can be heard at the microphones?
I'm just wondering about this.
Sir, can you come up to the microphone, please?
I'm just going to admit my ignorance. I'm just wondering what this was
Okay,
about.
sir, could you just give us your name and your address for the record?
Mark Paley, 40 Cushing Road,
Okay?
Milton.
What's your question?
I don't understand why I got this. I mean, this doesn't affect my property, I
No.
don't think.
No, it's just you're in a butter and this public hearing just to run electric conduit from a telephone pole into a property, that's all.
If you live near where this pole is being installed, I forget what the footage is, 700 or so many square feet from the location, the property location, then you would get a notice that there's a hearing. And this is, let me just click onto it, this, maybe Sheila can give us some more information on this, but this is really to install line at a utility pole.
And that's it.
That's it.
That's it.
The pole is already existing, and they're just bringing a wire across the town-owned property into the private property.
So I got this because the law
Requires
Yes,
it, that's correct.
requires it.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yes.
That's it.
It also requires us to advertise it in the newspaper, so there's certain hoops we have to jump through.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else who wanted to be heard on the utility public hearing? Okay. Ms. Gillis, did you want to provide any information to the board?
We're looking to install approximately 18 feet of conduit from pole 212 over 10 on Holland Street, and that's to bring in electrical service into a carriage house located at 610 Holland Street.
And it will not involve any tearing up of the roadway at all?
No.
We have a recommendation from the Department of Public Works
Okay.
in favor of it.
I'll move to approve a request from NSTAR Electric to install approximately 18 feet of conduit in Harlan Street at pole 212/10, 1,198 feet northwest of Hillside Street to provide electric service to 610 Harlan Street, contingent upon the stone wall not being disturbed without prior permission of the planning office.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous.
And I'll recuse myself from this next one, as
Okay.
this is my property.
Okay. The next property location is at number 1 Kinsale Lane. And we'll just, for the record again, ask, is there anyone who wishes to address this particular item? Ms. Gillis, would you like to say anything to this?
We're looking to install approximately 4 feet of conduit from pole 151 over 10, Wolcott, and it's to provide service to a new home at 86 Wolcott Road.
It must also be number 1 Kinsale Lane.
Yes.
Okay. And again, we have a recommendation from our Public Works Department supporting this application.
Okay, I'll move to approve a request from NSTAR Electric to install 4 feet of conduit in Walcott Road at pole 151/10 to provide electric service to number 1 Kinsale Lane.
Second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gillis.
Thank you very much.
Good night. Okay, the next item on our agenda is, we're going to have a brief discussion. This is not a common topic for a Board of Selectmen agenda, but we're going to talk a little bit about Ebola preparedness in the town and in the state, and our State Department of Public Health and the State Emergency Management Association is having lots of meetings, a lot of conference calls for elected officials, and we wanted to ask our first responders, specifically Chief Grant and Chief Wells, who are here, and we've also given an opportunity to the hospital to tell us a little bit about what the preparations are that they're making, because this is a topic that's of interest to the general public, and sometimes the concern gets a little bit too hyped, but at the same time, it's something that is on the minds of town government officials, and specifically our first responders and our public health personnel. So,
Is our public health director here, or?
no, she's not going to be here tonight, but we do have, we have Chief Jack Grant from the fire department, Chief Richard Wells from the police department.
Yeah, I was just curious to hear what the recommendations were on the phone-in.
There was a conference call.
The phone-in conference
Let me just
call, yeah.
introduce, and Cindy Page is Vice President of Clinical Services at Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital, Milton. I've had opportunity to work with Cindy over the years, and she's also a member of our local emergency planning commission. So I think the three people who are here can probably speak to that. Some of us did listen on that call, and it was quite an informative and interesting.
Yeah, I did want to, and I
Conference
couldn't
call.
make it at 3. They were supposed to have posted it later, and I could never find the rebroadcast of it.
Well, I know Jack, maybe we should start with Jack, because as president of the Fire Chiefs Association, he's been at a number of these meetings, and he can tell us a little bit about what's going on, Jack.
Yeah, at this point, what they're working on this morning was coming out with a set of minimum standards for first responder protective equipment. And they came up with a pretty good list that should be out fairly soon. They're also working on some training issues, trying to standardize things across the state. The big thing with it on our end, and I would say the hospital's end, it's a waterborne element or a fluid-borne element. So it's basically time, distance, and shielding. It's not a really difficult thing to protect yourself from. So it's, stay away from the fluid, keep yourself covered, and go from there. Again, like I say, it's nothing we haven't seen before. It's a different name.
Okay. So hospitals we are constantly preparing and managing infectious disease. I think that, this particular disease has not been seen in the United States. That's probably what makes it very scary to many people. But in terms of the management, we actually have done quite a bit of preparation. We've been working with the local community partners. We've been working with EMS. We've been working with our system. So at the hospital, our goal is really to make sure that we are screening people appropriately, and even prior to this particular outbreak in Texas, we were doing all of the components of what you would be looking for, what they're looking for at the CDC and at the state level, is that we're screening people for travel history, because there are many ailments that people can carry back from different countries. So our goal is really to screen people and to be looking at what the signs and symptoms are and appropriately managing them in those situations. So we have a very active plan, not only local within the hospital, but also within our hospital system. So with the Beth Israel system, because our goal is that if we were to ever see a patient who had a highly contagious ailment and was very sick and needed treatment, really our goal is to evaluate, stabilize, and prepare for transport. So we've been working with Fallon and with the medical center, because they actually have inpatient management capacity, is that any patient that would come in would not make it past our ED. They would be managed appropriately in the ED, and then they'd be transported into the medical center where they have the containment unit, because it's most contagious when the patient is most sick.
By medical center, Cindy, you're talking about Beth
Beth
Israel
Israel
Deaconess
Deaconess Medical Center. Yes, thank
When
you.
you say ED,
Emergency department.
We call it ER.
Okay.
They have this ED terminology. She
Kinda what I figured, but I wasn't sure.
We've been friends for 20 years, we're trying to she won't get rid of it. But,
well, I guess I have a question. I mean, even in the ER, ED, whatever you want to call it, just to stabilize, you would have the nurses would have contact with a potential
Absolutely.
patient. So have they been trained on how to suit up and everything else and does the hospital have all the necessary
Yes, we
shield
have,
equipment?
all of the necessary PPE. We have been a little bit more aggressive than the CDC was initially, and the CDC has now caught up with us. We've worked collaboratively not only with Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, our community partners, but also with all of the area hospitals in the state, and looking at what is the appropriate protective equipment that you should have. We have looked at who needs to have contact with these patients and making sure that we are not exposing, if we have anyone who's potentially contagious, that we are limiting the exposure to a very limited number of folks who have had extensive training, including one-on-one training. The most important thing in this situation is, how do you put on equipment? Is it appropriately fit for you? Do you know how to put it on? Have we put it on you so that you know that you're not a little claustrophobic? Because if you are claustrophobic, the ability for you to follow directions after having this on is very difficult. And the most important thing is, how do you take it off? And can you take it off if you have any contaminant on you? How do you take it off without contaminating yourself? So we have been using the buddy system all along, and that's, I think, a process that you've heard a little bit about probably in the last day and a half, couple of days, is that it's important to have somebody watching you as you put on and take off the equipment. We have been using chocolate sauce to train people with, because you need a visual entity to be able to tell you, are you contaminating yourself or not? Everybody who has gone through training has not necessarily passed training at this point, so we are only putting people in the front lines who have been trained and been deemed competent. It can be very difficult. We've identified who should probably never be suited up, whether it be for an potentially infectious patient, or if we had a hazmat situation, we know who is a little bit claustrophobic. So we modify jobs so that we don't put people in those situations. And we also know those who are struggling to be able, even with a buddy, to be able to disrobe from having the garb on. So there's constant training once they're trained. Our emphasis right now is making sure that our staff have an opportunity to continuously practice putting on and taking off the gowns and the gloves and the hoods and the booties, because it is a very, very time-consuming and difficult endeavor to be able to do it without touching the outside. And the buddy is the most critical aspect of it, because they're the ones watching out for you, making sure that in between each step you're stopping and you're using Purell to wash the gloves or wash your hands once you get to the end of the process. We also have a very rigorous process post management if a patient were to be managed, where the individual is assessed by our occupational health department to determine, is there any risk? Was there any potential that somebody would have had an exposure, and how do we manage those individuals, both from a physical health perspective, but also from a stress perspective? Do they need a little bit of debriefing? Do they need a little bit of support? Because it can be very stressful.
In terms of if somebody does walk into the emergency room, and I know it would be a very rare circumstance, probably will not happen, but should somebody walk in with the disease, and there are other people in the emergency room, is there a mechanism to basically isolate people and
Yes, immediately isolate the person is, again...
But what about the other people in the room?
Well, it's if somebody is not showing symptoms, if they are not showing symptoms, then it may just be a screen out, and there's no worry. Again, this is not an airborne contaminant or an airborne virus.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's all in keeping distance and maintaining distances, so we don't have people sitting in close proximity to the walk, to the entrance up to the folks that are there, checking people in. We quickly ask questions. We actually have signage outside, so prior to, not only for this, but also for the flu, we ask that if you're not feeling well, that you place a mask on, and a mask is enough to protect everyone. So we have the sign both in English and in French. asking not only if they've traveled within the regions, in the West African regions, but also if someone's not feeling well, because it is flu season. So at all of our entrances, we have signage that if you're not feeling well, to put on a mask. And a surgical mask is the appropriate protection when somebody is entering the facility.
At this point, I would just add to that, that even in the street, that, you know, the isolation distance is set at 6 feet. So these guys, with what they're doing in the hospital, will be far beyond that.
Okay. That, I guess that was my next way, as first responders, police and fire. I assume you've been trained to understand what the symptoms are of the disease and learn to recognize the potential that somebody might have it.
Yeah, really, and right now, in talking with Fallon's, you know, it's one of those things that if it's a suspect case and there's no need for immediate intervention, the plan is for the police and the fire to basically stay in the street and, you know, expose the fewest amount of people as possible, so Fallon's would take the lead in that.
Okay.
They've taken a big, if you followed them at all, just in both what they've disseminated to us, and they've been followed regularly in the media, they've done a great job. They've been right out front with this from the get-go. I mean, we are fortunate we have big city EMS here in a company that big with the type of resources they bring. So for both our responders, fire and police, we wouldn't even have to go in. They're able to bring a lot to the scene quickly, similar to what you saw in Braintree. That patient in Braintree from Harvard went right in town. I think it would be similar if we had a house here. I don't think Fallon's going to take anybody who even questions is going to go near BI Deaconess. The issue for BI Deaconess is, as Cindy described, is if they walk in the ER. And we have protocols for that, for locking down the whole facility and going to whatever level you have to. The only final part that I'm going to add is that if we get a person that we trace back to a house in Milton, there will have to be protocols for us to lock that down. We have contract companies that, if you saw one of the cases, it might have been the first nurse in Dallas where the house with the bed sheets, or I might actually, it was the first victim, the victim who died, the things just sat there for days. Those things have to be addressed because, as Chief Grant says, this isn't like the flu or a cold. This is very similar to an HIV type of transmission. You have to have that. So those are just issues that we would have to address right away and make sure that we bring in whatever contract to make sure that we go as far back as we can go in our control to deal with the
Now, in terms of the
remediation of
school nurse and, you know, just kind of thinking.
It's coming everywhere. I can't
So
think
have
of
they been taught to recognize, again, the symptoms and take the temperature?
Actually,
and
Margaret Gibbons sent them. She was one of the first that I saw through Caroline that she sent to all the school nurses in town about the same thing. But
Great.
this
Okay.
stuff coming, NIH, DPS, MEMA, DFS, Dr. Muse from Canton, and I just sent Caroline a PowerPoint that he put together this week that's just been out since yesterday. There's a lot of information. And we're learning. I just heard on the way here that the NBC correspondent who caught it, he was determined today to be Ebola-free, and the first thing he said was he still doesn't know how he got it. He thought he took all the precautions. He has no idea how he got it.
Okay.
So we'll learn as we go, but we do understand that much, is that
Yeah, the big thing that they're not knowing how he caught it, I believe there's one of the nurses, they're not sure how she got it either. But the thought is, and Cindy mentioned it earlier, hazmat, which has been around for a long time, you know, it's always been stressed, you know, the dress-out procedure. You know, once you're out of that area and you've been fully deconned and everything else, the doffing of the equipment has been less of an issue. In this case, it's found that it's the reverse, and you've really got to slow yourself down and be very careful, which is why it's a buddy system, even if it can be a supervised buddy system in taking the equipment off. And that's where they think that they have caught this, those that did.
Right.
if you've seen the CNN special that Dr. Gupta has done, who is there in medical, he uses the chocolate sauce analogy, and he puts the whole thing, and it's in his chief, it's taking it off is really a significant situation, totally different than normal deconning or how it's, and he did it and demonstrated it, and it's very, and again, to what Cindy said, you know, the whole being in that suit and the cost, you know, not being used to it. Firefighters are probably the most used to it because they're in the Scott air packs all the time. for anyone, law enforcement, EMS, anyone else, even public health, it's not the norm. Actually, probably the people that are on the Milton are like the aftermath people, because everything they do is in it.
And just to follow up on the schools, not only public school conversations, but also there has been a lot of reach out and discussion amongst the local colleges and the local private schools as well. So there's been good communication amongst all of the local partners to make sure that all the facts are out, and if there are questions or resources that need to be assisted with or provided with, that is something that we as a team have made an effort to ensure that is occurring.
Great.
Cindy, we appreciate you bringing some colleagues with you from the hospital tonight.
Yes, I would love to introduce them.
Yes, that'd be wonderful.
We are very lucky to have a local expert. So we have our infectious disease physician here, George Baranaga, behind me.
Baranaga.
And
Welcome.
I have the director of our public relations department, Bob McChrystal, as well. And I think one of the questions that Bob may have is for you all, as we kind of wrap this up, is there something in terms of education or information that would be helpful for us to be providing on our website going forward, if you feel that there are questions that are unanswered or information that could be helpful?
Okay, that's probably something we'd want to give some thought to with our Board of Health and the Public Health Director, and let you know.
Great.
Unless anyone else has any thoughts, or Richard or Jeff?
Other than the fact that it has been all over the news, I think
Yes.
most people are at least aware of what the symptoms are, and
Certainly gotten a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And,
I think the fact that 2 healthcare workers got in the first case that's pretty dramatic, and I think that sent shockwaves. It really expedited things through the country in all of the disciplines, as far as we better pay attention here.
I talked with the Public Health Director, Caroline Kinsella, today, who couldn't be here, but said it is serious as we're taking this and doing all the preparations and protocols that need to be done. Everyone needs to worry more about the flu, because you're more likely to get that
absolutely,
than
yes.
anything else. And she recommends hand washing and being very careful not to try to avoid the flu, because we're, as you mentioned, Cindy, we're heading right into that season as well.
Well, that's another good point, too, that the flu shot even more so than ever, because the symptoms are so similar that, the chance that you send people into a panic just because you have the flu, but, somebody mistakes it,
And it's really coming down. The most important thing is that it's travel history. Travel history is the number one, and it is very specific countries followed up by symptoms, so.
We don't normally take questions, but this man had his hand up. Did you have a question, sir, that you'd like to ask?
Is there a threshold temperature below which the life of the virus is significantly reduced when it's out on the surface?
That might be a question for Dr. Baranaga.
I don't think anyone knows that. Lisa, I certainly don't know the answer, and I haven't seen anything that addresses that, so I don't think I can know.
Yeah, it's, at the state conference call today, Dr. Al Di Maria talked a little bit about, it's about whether or not a surface has contaminant on it and whether it's wet or dry. That's more of, once it's dry, this contaminant is very fragile. So it can be eradicated very easily on superficial surfaces with basic cleaning.
Well, thank you all for coming in tonight. It's an important topic for people to know that we're at least preparing for and thinking about, and it's on the radar of your town government. So Chief Grant, Chief Wells, thank you.
I have to give Sergeant Caputo a plug. He does a good job keeping the LAPC together. As I
Well,
articulated to you.
yeah, just really quick to mention that, I'm glad you said that. They've got it set so that, the question's going to be asked from their dispatch. You're immediately going to start that check down, because it is flu season, Have you traveled out of the country in the last 21 days? Has anybody you know? And you can really get it off the map pretty quickly. So, and that's going to start right there at their dispatch.
Great.
Chief Grant, Chief Wells, thank you. Cindy Page, Dr.
Thank you.
Baranaga, and Bob McChrystal from the hospital.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you all
you.
for coming in tonight. We appreciate it.
Good night.
Good night. Okay, we have another item that we need to move up. I know we've got Joe Lynch and Catherine Dunphy here for the stormwater, but Joe Prondak is our building commissioner. He needs to be at the Board of Appeals meeting, which is starting very shortly. So we're going to move up number 9, which is the demolition bid for 0 Central Avenue.
Good evening.
Good evening, Joe. Thanks for
Welcome.
coming here, and we know you have to be downstairs, so this is the demolition bid for 0 Central Avenue. Do you want to start us off?
Sure. So we received a bid, single bid for the demolition of our portion of the building. The bid was $347,224. We have since renegotiated some of that cost with the demolition contractor under some supervision from town council. And what we were able to bring the cost down was about $30,000 in total. 24,500 of that is in T costs that we would have to absorb, and that's similar to what the previous bid process called out for. And then an additional $5,500 was taken off the bid in allowing the contractor to leave the basically the foundation, the underground portion of the foundation in place.
Would that mean, Joe, he took 5,500 off the labor?
I would think it was 5,500 off the labor because he did say that all his equipment is going to be there anyway. So, yeah, I would assume it's labor.
The 24,500 you said is really to do with the MBTA, right?
Correct. That was his allowance for the MBTA. So, based on that, well, from a public safety point of view, it is my hope, my recommendation that the bid be awarded. However, I do realize there are financial considerations for the town because we are substantially over what we budgeted for this demolition.
And our budget was based on an estimate, Joe?
It was based on a volunteer estimate from a member of the Suffolk construction team, and that was, I believe, $250 to $275 approximately. And you know, that was the result of a cursory inspection of the building, not a detailed inspection of the building. So, you know, I think this building certainly has some unique characteristics that are unlike any other building in the area, that present a unique set of challenges. The proximity to the MBTA and the co-ownership of the building, coupled with the collapsed portion of the building on the unknown land, which is kind of landlocked. You can't get to it until our building or the Conley's portion of the building is torn down. So I do know that it is a high bid. Purely from a public safety point of view, I would hope we can find a way to get this building down as soon as possible. And certainly I would advocate for not going back out to bid if we could possibly find a way to do that.
Now, the contractor has agreed to an additional week extension.
If it's necessary, yes.
Again, I would still feel more, we're, you know, from Suffolk's estimate, granted it may have been just a, you know, off the cuff estimate, but we appropriated money based upon that estimate, and we're, you know, somewhere it's $50,000 above that estimate. I would feel more, and we have a sole source bid, and there was, you know, no other bidders. I would feel more comfortable with a peer review of the bid, just to know that it's a fair bid.
What would that involve?
Getting just a professional, like the person that originally gave us the estimate to...
Or would there be a cost to it, and how formal would it be?
I don't think it would have to be tremendously formal. I just want a professional with professional set of eyes to look at it and come back to us and say, in their opinion, it's the bid is fair.
So the amount that's currently, that you've negotiated it down to, Joe, is what?
Is now $317,224.
And I mean, if it does come in as a fair bid, I would say for the $5,000 or so difference, why not just pull the rest of the foundation out and vastly improve the land?
Sure.
That would,
Yeah, I'm not opposed to a peer review. What's the likelihood, Joe, that we'd be able to get one in pretty short order? Because this, just keep in mind, this demolition bidder has given us a couple of extensions already, and the building, not just our building, the Connolly, the combined building, we've, for a long time, been very concerned about public safety, and the building's been condemned. The 131 LA, well, we haven't, I guess there's been various condemnation proceedings, but we're concerned about public safety. We've had a 139 hearing, and we've had a demolition agreement that we've entered into. I would be inclined to go ahead and accept the bid based on what Mr. Brondek's recommendation is and what the condition of the building is. I know that it's over the amount that was estimated, but again, as Joe explained, that was a cursory estimate. And I think, Joe, you said at our last meeting that one of the issues that the demolition bidder mentioned to you is that the price of steel, the market has changed for that, and obviously he would be reselling portions of the building that
the
are
scrap
comprised of
steel, yes.
steel for scrap.
I don't have any specific numbers on that, but I do believe the contractor's truthful in that statement. I know that the price of steel does fluctuate, but I don't have a reference to compare that to necessarily.
But we are, just by way of background, we are, as everyone knows, we have had some discussions with the owner of 131 Elliott Street, and those are ongoing, but in talking with our town council, and Joe, the town administrator, and I had a meeting with the bidder, and we did indicate to him that we are in some negotiations, and if, that's an if, depending on how the board would vote, if we were to accept the bid, that we would want the bid to be made null and void if we were to sell it, or transfer the property out of our control into a third party. So, so one option that we would have would be to accept the bid and make it contingent upon the bid becoming, the award of the bid becoming null and void if we were to transfer the property, the town-owned property, to the owner of 131 LA Street or to another owner.
Yeah, but that agreement with the Connollys would have to be made really soon.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't want to spend $320,000 to tear down the building,
Agreed.
plus $169,000 for the acquisition, plus about $100,000 over the last number of years in legal fees, which is about $590,000, $600,000 we would have spent on a building to
Correct.
hand over to a guy, to put up a mixed-use development. I'm not sure if that's a good investment for the town,
No, we should keep in mind the purpose that the town acquired the property for back a dozen or so years ago was to influence the ultimate outcome of the area, because that was taking place at the same time that the ULI and other experts were trying to design what the reuse of that building would be. So it was really to influence the ultimate development of the site. So we should keep that in mind. But naturally, yes, I agree. If we were to pay the demolition cost, obviously we'd be in a much different position. But what this proposal would be to accept the bid and make it subject to us rendering the bid null and void, which the developer, the bidder would have to agree to. So it would be in our motion, but it would also be in the notice of award, and it would be in the bid contract, that if we were to enter into an agreement to transfer the property in short, fairly soon, obviously, then the bid would become null and void before the costs really were incurred. So I agree with you on that, Dennis, that would be, you would contemplate it happening sooner rather than later.
And I know, Joe, I know you put a lot of work into the RFP, but it just concerns me a little bit that 11 bid packages went out and only one came back. And, I did contact a few of the contractors that wanted to bid on it, but didn't feel that there wasn't enough information in the package for them to put a bid in. So I'm wondering if it would be worth just denying the bid altogether and going back out to bid and risk coming in at $100,000 less or even more. Or at the very least, as Tom was saying, maybe delay it by a week so that we can get some we can get some information from these contractors, and if we get the feeling that we can save 100,000, I think it's worth it. You know, we walked the building the other day.
Right.
Joe and I walked the building. My first time ever in there. It is scary, to be
Yeah, it is.
truthful. But, in my opinion, the Connolly's portion is in imminent danger of collapsing. There's no doubt about that. There is roof collapse. But in the town-owned portion, it is a steel and concrete building. It's not, again, only in my opinion, and I'm not a structural engineer, but I deal with them all the time. I don't think it's in imminent danger of collapsing right now. I think if we delay it by a week, so we can get some, what you call it, a peer review?
Yeah, just a cost estimate, you know, somebody to look at the bid and say that, yeah, it's a reasonable bid based upon what we now know the conditions are, I guess,
Right.
you know.
I mean, personally,
I think it's due diligence, really.
I would like to, and I mentioned this to Joe earlier, you know, I'm in the middle of getting demolition bids for 3 different projects that I'm doing. This is what I do for a living in the construction industry. But I didn't have a chance to speak to this demolition contractor. You know, I think I'd like that opportunity. I did text him yesterday only because I got the information yesterday. And he did text me back. He was supposed to call me today, but he didn't. If we could delay this by a week, I would love to speak to him and see how he's coming up with this price and actually do some research on steel prices myself. 'Cause all I'm hearing is that steel prices are going down. How do we know that? Has anybody researched that? Maybe steel prices are going up. But I think 1 week would make a big difference, Katie. If,
Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm not opposed to it if the demolition bidder is willing to give us another week. This would now be our 3rd extension. So, Joe, is it feasible, is realistic for you within about a week to get a review, to consult with either the party that gave us the estimate or another
I would
party?
certainly reach out to that party, but if they weren't able to respond in that quickly, I think my only other option would be to somehow reach out to another demolition contractor, one that did not bid on the project. I think I think that would be the fairest way. But I would expect that they would charge a fee for that.
Do you have any idea what the fee might be?
I would have no way of knowing. If I had to guess, I would say, you know, nobody's going to come to the table for less than a couple of $1,000s, I would think.
Yeah, possibly, but. But again, I just want to know that we're not awarding a bid that is just totally unreasonable. I don't know that it is, I don't believe that it is, but I just don't know. I'm not a contractor.
As we sit here and speak, I think perhaps Cal Olson, who is the lead architect on our school projects, and who has, since the school project, has done a number of other projects for the town, might be a good resource to check with that. Very, very non-biased and I think would do a fair and reasonable assessment of that bid.
I think a week would make a big difference because, again, I think we have 3 scenarios here. Number one, and I think it's the most important, we really should, if we are going to get a deal with Mr. Connolly, that should happen that should happen quickly. Because then we can go ahead and do whatever we have to do with the building, transfer it and all that good stuff. But if it's not going to happen, a mixed-use development down there, if the 40B goes ahead, and we award this bid, it's going to cost us $600,000 to put in basically a parking lot.
Well, I think that's, number one, that $100,000 calculation is coming from a number of different sources, right? You're talking about the initial purchase price, you're talking about litigation.
Correct.
And there's no guarantee that it would be a parking lot. I think we can all be agreed upon that. There's certainly no agreement on that at this stage.
Well, my question then would be, for scenario number 3, are we better off, if Mr. Connolly does not take the building, are we better off just putting it out to bid and let somebody else purchase the building and put an office building in there and create income out of it. Besides spending, again, close to 600,000, everything included.
I guess the practical problem we have, though, is we're all of agreement that 131 Elliott has to come down, that building is condemned.
That's correct.
And is in danger of having more collapses in it, that I don't know that we have the time to try and sell the building as is and have somebody else take it down. It'd be nice, but I don't think we have that kind of time.
Well, let's keep in mind, too, we're under a demolition agreement that we've signed.
Correct, yeah.
And has obligations on the town as well as obligations on the other party, Carrick. So, Joe, is this agreeable to, you've spoken with the demolition bidder, that he's agreeable to a one-week extension? We wouldn't want to have this expire without having an agreement with him that
Right.
he would extend it for another week.
I believe he is agreeable to that, and I will.
Which would take us through Tuesday, the 28th, which
And
is
we're
the
meeting-
second night of town meeting.
Yeah, I actually put it to, I tentatively written one up just before coming in here, so I made it through Wednesday just to, I made it for 8 days instead of 7, just to make sure.
Okay.
If we came to some agreement next Tuesday, then it would give us that following day to do the actual paperwork.
Okay. I'd be agreeable to that if we're not, it sounds like we don't have a consensus here on the board to go ahead and accept the bid contingent upon it becoming null and void if we transfer it. So probably the second best option is to extend it for the week and see what more information we can obtain at this point.
That's fine with me.
Joe, is there anything else you want to add about this?
Not at the moment. I think that pretty much covers it. I'll go forward with the
Right.
assessment.
Great.
If the bid got denied next, we say in 8 days' time, how long would it take to go back out again?
I think, it's going to take at least several weeks. I mean, the first bid, it took 2 months roughly to get that together. And I think this time we have to go back and sit with the T. I think we would be obligated to try and ensure that the other bidders, that everybody submits a bid. Everybody who takes a bid package submits a bid, or at least a fair number of them. I think some of the ambiguity on this last bid was likely with the T, because I think some of these contractors were calling the T, getting various parties to comment on what it might or might not cost for a shutdown and what's involved in that.
And no man's land.
Yeah, and that was another complication, but.
But that was included in the bid as something that we would be including within
Yes.
our
Right.
responsibility.
Right. So I think, we're looking at another 2 to 3 months to put the bid package together and get it rebid. And then the award process, I mean, we're surely looking at February and March, and then if we have a disastrous winter, that's certainly going to delay the actual demolition. It could be as late as April or May.
And Joe, we should keep in mind, as you pointed out at the last meeting, a future bid could come in higher than $347,000, or even use the $317 we're talking now. We could be looking at a next round of bids that comes in higher. If
That is
what we're being told about the
always a
steel prices
possibility.
is true, there could be other factors that, I think rejecting the bid would be opening us up to a lot of risk that we'd have delays, we wouldn't be able to get the building down as quickly as we'd like, we have the demolition agreement to think about, we have
Right.
potential additional costs to think about, and it seems to me it's highly unlikely we're going to
The only way I
get
could
a
see.
substantial reduction in this
Right.
bid.
The only way I could see rejecting the bid is if a professional came in and said it is unrealistic.
That makes sense that we should take that course of action then, because we can talk all about other bidders all we want, but at the end of the day, we had one bidder, and 11 bid packages went out. I know there are various reasons given. Joe, I think you mentioned at the last meeting that one of the bidders who took out a package, we shouldn't even call him a bidder, it was someone who took out a package but did not bid, mentioned the fact that there's co-ownership of this building and that there'd be 2 different contractors working on it, and that was an issue that prohibited that party from submitting a bid. So there could be multiple reasons that bids were not submitted here, and I think we should keep all of those factors in mind when we're considering that even though this is over the estimate amount, the estimate was last winter, spring, and it was a cursory, it was a volunteer estimate, and we're grateful to the party that gave the estimate, but it may not have been as in-depth as the bid was.
Agreed, but, it's just so unusual that 11 bid packages go out and only one come back, and the people that I spoke to had the same reasoning for not sending in a bid. So in the private sector, there is no way in hell I would accept a bid if I only received one bid. I'd be going out over and over again, because it's money coming out of my pocket. It's the way I look at the town money as well. We only have one bid. I think it's substantially high. I wouldn't be opposed to rejecting the bid and going back out immediately. Hopefully we'll get the eminent domain passed on Monday night. And we know a lot more about the MBTA license right now. I mean, we have a lot more knowledge about it now than we did when we went out to
We
bid.
do, and it's resulted in a $317,000 number rather than $347,000. So there is a, and again, some of that cost for the T is coming out of the bid, but it would be borne by the town. So it's really transferring the obligation from one area to another area.
I mean, to be honest, I'll have a hard time voting on this if it's only one bid that we have in front of us. It's just not in my nature to do that. I can't do it.
Okay. Is there anything else on this topic? So, Joe, you will get back to us as soon as
I will
possible?
reach out to a consultant and get back to you as soon as I can.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, so.
All right, thank you, Joe.
Thanks very much.
Okay, we are back now on our agenda to number 8. And this is a discussion on the new stormwater regulations. Joined by our DPW Director, Joe Lynch,
Hey, Joe.
and former Selectman Kathy Dunphy, who is our MWRA representative.
Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, how are you?
Catherine is not just our representative, but she's also the chairman of the advisory board of the MWA, so she's the person in the know at the authority.
Probably knows more about this topic than anyone in Milton, maybe in the state.
I'm sure.
I don't think so.
I do want to thank Catherine and the advisory board for hosting what was a very, very informative discussion and workshop last Thursday over in the city of Wellesley, town of Wellesley, where all their MWA community members gathered and to hear about, in a collective fashion, what the stormwater permit, this new stormwater permit might look like and how it might affect the towns and the member communities. And I would guess, and I don't have a real number, but first of all, it was lunch, so you automatically know the attendance is going to double by a factor of 3.
Well, we always have a lunch, but
Right, so
it was
well
a good
attended.
lunch.
I'd say it was well over 100 people, probably close
Yes.
to 150 people attended this workshop. And what I found very rewarding in that was that the things that I've been professing here in Milton and in the town of Shirley before I came to Milton, and the city of Melrose before I went to Shirley, is the other shoe was about to drop from EPA. Now, it's taken a long time. 2003 is when the first EPA general permit came out affecting most of the communities. Prior to 2003, only the large communities within regions were affected, and there were only 4 in the New England region that was subject to the Phase 1 permit, if you will. Under the Phase 2 permit, which we were lumped in with for the vast majority of all other communities across New England and across the country, was quite onerous, as we thought. What it really did, though, in retrospect, is it took some pretty basic things. Let's let people know why stormwater is important and what causes pollution in stormwater, and what are the things that you do as an individual household owner or as a business owner or as a community. What are the things that you do that contribute to the pollution streams? And with that knowledge and the public education piece of it, along with it became a series of BMPs, best management practices. Part of those were good housekeeping. Part of those were a more diligent effort in catch basin cleaning and street sweeping. Part of those things is diligent use of applications of fertilizers on town-owned properties. Promotion of things like household hazardous waste collection, yard waste collection, all those sorts of things. It also gave the towns an opportunity to convene a stormwater advisory committee in each town. We did. The result of that was the creation of our first stormwater bylaw. And one of the things that stormwater bylaw allowed us to do was to look at well, what are the types of things we want to include to control pollution, and what are the things that affect us during construction, which directly, in a dramatic way, affect water quality as it leaves a site and finds its way into the system. That 5-year permit issued in 2003 has been renewed ad nauseum, just automatically rolled over each year since. So we are now working on the end of the 6th-year extension. All the while, EPA and DEP in the communities have been trying to wrestle with what this new permit is going to look like. And I've been saying for a long time now, is that you thought the old one was onerous, wait till you see the new and improved permit. So what has happened now is 3 weeks ago, the federal EPA has issued the draft federal permit. And I talked about this a couple weeks ago when I was here before the board. And what that has done is, for the first time now, let towns and cities in our region know, boy, oh boy, these are the things that are going to be required, and these are the additional things that we're going to need to do. So I found it very rewarding last week to go to the workshop and hear experts in the field point to things that we've done as a community here in Milton, and we've done well. And more importantly, the participation in things like we did last year by partnering up with other communities and applying for a Community Innovation Challenge grant and receiving that and moving that, with regards to stormwater, and moving that forward. And in moving that forward, that Milton presented itself as a pilot community to look at for the first time. And the reason why they selected us is because we have the baseline of our GIS mapping very, very well mapped out. We've got great detail. We've got great regulation. We've reinstituted our household hazardous waste program. We've got a great recycling program. We have curbside yard waste. We have all of the elements. So even a community such as ours doing all the right things under the old permit, use it as a baseline and then measure under the new permit, these are the things you need to do additionally. And I think I alarmed you folks a couple of weeks ago when I told you that, and I'm trying to go to my numbers, but I think in round numbers, the new permit, what it means to Milton, and this is based on the grant that we did looking at Milton, is about $1.2 million a year, every year.
Of additional cost?
Of additional cost. No, of cost.
Of cost, okay.
Of which we're currently doing about $350,000 in efforts.
About $750,000.
So our yard waste efforts, our hazardous waste collection efforts, our street sweeping, our catch basin cleaning, those things that we're doing on a pretty regular basis is a value of about $350 that we're already doing. So it's that gap is what we're talking about. And we're in a better position than, I dare say, the vast majority of communities across the Commonwealth. I think you'd agree, wouldn't you, Catherine?
Yes.
And which doesn't go far with affordability.
No.
So the second part of the workshop last week hosted by the authority looked at the question of affordability. So what should towns do? And that's why I was here a couple of weeks ago, and that was to ask the Board of Selectmen to endorse us signing on for another round of a Community Innovation Challenge grant, where we would look at the springboard from what we've just done this last year, what we might do next year, and what it would do is address the affordability question. And I think we talked about it ever so briefly, and it's way premature to talk about, what it might look like or how it may go. But the consensus of the New England region, and I dare say the country, is you can't absorb this new effort within your existing structure of tax base. You may pass this along through your tax base through whatever legislative requirements are, and in our instance would be Prop 2.5, to carry it on and pass it off across all the taxpayers, or look at creating a stormwater utility. Stormwater utility looking very much like an enterprise, where the funds would be raised through some equitable fashion, yet to be determined, equitable fashion whose purpose of collecting those monies is dedicated specifically and exclusively for carrying out the requirements of the federal stormwater permit. So that's, in last week's session focused on all of those elements. I'm happy that, Catherine hosting it as the AMWRA Advisory Board, but more important, I'm very happy that, Anne Marie and Amy, who've been hearing me wringing my hands all these years about this cost coming and it looming. I think they've heard it firsthand. They've heard it from me, but now that I've gotten, I hope, some heightened credibility on, this is not unique to Milton, and we're in good shape, and the things that I've been talking about are things that is where the industry is going in New England. So, the draft permit's out. It's out for a 90-day public comment period.
It's my understanding that we'll see that permit from between now and February. We may even have a permit by February.
Might even have the permit. Well, it's out for public comment for the 90-day period that's required. I've seen 90-day public comment periods last 180 days. I've seen them last 2 years. I've seen them reject the public comment and go back and rewrite. What we're hearing out of EPA this time around is enough, 6 years of extensions. We've worked out the details. The permit is coming. So we're talking about, a permit. When I say permit, it's a mandate. It's going to come out in February, obligating then each town, each MS4, which is a municipal sanitary storm sewer system. It's called an NOI, and then there'd be so the general permit in February, and the specific permits for each community will come out sometime thereafter. That being said, is we're looking at something where the mandate is in effect July 1, 2015, this coming July, as soon as. There was some ramping up that I'm sure EPA would understand, but I think there's got to be a very methodical track laid out of how it is the town's looking to achieve or accomplish these various elements in the permit. And I think certainly continuation of everything you have been doing is expected, and then taking it further. Without getting into the specificity, there are things like wet weather, understanding where all of your outfalls are. Where does your drainage enter into water bodies, streams, brooks, ponds, and rivers? Measuring the water quality for certain elements, and those elements are driven by what are called TMDLs, total maximum daily loads, for certain pollution streams within each watershed, and then tracking them upstream. So you need to understand what the pollution is, what the impairment is, what the pollution is, what the source is, where might it come from, and then go out and identify it, and then go out and enforce it. Just that analytical process to chase a plume upstream could be hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Is that something that our town employees can do, or is that something
That's something that would have to be subbed out.
Subbed out.
That would have to be subbed out. In the 5-year forecast, I addressed that issue in a very abstract way. I see that the creation of 4 new positions in Public Works, some of which can be funded through solid waste savings, some of which are just brand-new positions. I forecasted that the impact of this permit, not just me, but me through our consortium, through the pilot, I see 4 new positions just administering this new permit. Some of which, like the data collection, the sampling collection, we might be able to do on our own, but all the analytical lab work would be sent out.
Just a bunch of questions, but first, how is this, obviously the individual communities are greatly impacted. Financial cost to the state itself, is there any?
Yes, they're their own MS4. I actually raised the question last week at the workshop that, and it's not as cut and dried as it's our drainage system here in Milton. Well, we have the DCR who has runoff from the reservation. There is runoff associated with it. There is some pollution stream that comes with that from the reservation.
So they're going to be required to measure theirs?
That flows into their system, their drainage system, that may flow into the state highway system, that may then in turn flow into our system before we dump it into the Neponset River. So understanding the chain of travel, you might actually engage 3 other MS4s. The city of Boston, for example, though we only have 1 outfall going to Quincy, and that would be Cunningham Brook, over by Furnace Brook. That's our only outfall to Quincy. We have nothing to Canton. We have nothing. We have two outfalls. We have several outfalls to Boston. So that's our only abutting community issues that we would deal with.
So does the state have its own permit along with all the other communities?
They have the general permit, which covers the entire Commonwealth. Actually covers the entire New England region.
Okay.
And then the state itself has their own. DCR will have a general permit, their specific permit. DCR, all the state university systems will have their own permits.
Okay.
So because they're all their own systems.
So I guess then the next question is, everything flows downhill, and we're the bottom of the hill.
The problem is we're right on the bank.
So, you know, if there's an increased cost to the state, you know, and you know, there's really an increase in taxes to cover it, so it, you know, it's going to have an impact someplace along the line in terms of local aid.
It's very, very premature to speak of it, but we had experts from across the country who were at the workshop last week, and what has been done in other regions who've been subject to this type of permitting already in years past. They have, in fact, used the fee for stormwater service. They've based it on a whole set of different tools. It could be on a flat fee per property owner basis. It could be based on a per square foot of impervious area of roofs and driveways and whatnot, with what's called an equivalent resident unit, meaning the average unit has this to begin with, so we won't penalize you for that. It's just a flat fee. And then anything over that could be an additional fee. And then it could also be bonuses for employing best management practices. Maybe you do groundwater infiltration. Maybe you, in fact, use low nitrogen fertilizers.
I guess it's hard to measure, though, right? And that's the...
The good thing is the GIS data we have, without getting into details. We have LiDAR, radar, infrared photogrammetry that produced our GIS system. We know, we have 1 foot contour intervals. We know where our watersheds are. We know where our stormwater system is. We know where our sewer system is. We know the impervious area.
But to bring it back to a ratepayer.
So you can bring it
and try
down.
and measure somehow, other than arbitrarily, you can't put a meter on a piece of property and measure it.
You can't. You'd have to do it on something that's not abstract. You'd have to do something very objective in an impervious area. What's done most places. A lot of places do it flat fee, just simply flat fee. Doesn't necessarily address the fairest way, especially when you've got, you know, industry, large industry, which we don't have. So, you know, it's that next step on our review with, if we get the grant, if we're looking exactly at using the information we have and what is the most equitable way to do it.
And clearly, we have to plan for it. I mean, but has there been any groundswell at all throughout the country of pushing back to the feds for an unfunded mandate like this, or has anybody heard of one?
It was mentioned last week, but there are parts of the country where they have had stormwater management and stormwater fees for years and years, for generations.
California, western part of the country.
And it's more New England, and particularly in Massachusetts, that nothing has been done here in terms of that, or very little. A few communities that spoke at the meeting, Gloucester has a stormwater regulations, but they haven't actually implemented them. Both Reading and Newton have had stormwater systems and fees since 2006. Reading is about $40 a year, and that's for a single-family home or a two-family home. And Newton...
And they do a flat fee.
And they do a flat fee. So that's it. And then Newton has been about $25 a year for a unit, but they expect that will increase even without what the surprises are going to be that we're going to see soon. The advisory board's having its regular November meeting. It will again be in Wellesley, which is convenient for us. And there will be a representative from the EPA. So we will have an opportunity to find out as much as we can, and we can ask questions. So that's the best we can do now.
Great.
So in addition to the MWA Advisory Board, you know, the various professional affiliations that I belong with, New England Public Works Association, the American Society of Civil Engineers, the New England Water Works Association, as well as the NEWIA, New England Water Environment Association. This has been on our radar for, God, 10 years. And we've been, you know, everybody, like I said, wringing our hands. We're just waiting for what this next draft would look like, and it's now upon us.
There's another piece of good news, and I hope Joe has told you that MWA has a new II program, and previously the town has received 40% grant. What was it, 40% grant and 60% you'd have to pay back. It's now going to be 75% grant and only 25% loan to be paid back.
And the loan is a 0% loan.
0% loan.
That's great.
So that will give us an opportunity to perhaps put more water into the stormwater pipes, but at least we won't be sending it to Deer Island and get charged for it, so.
We've participated on a very faithful basis in the II program over the years, and I dare say that looking at our monthly consumption reports and actually seeing what's happening with our sewer rates, and I've kind of talked about that when we set the rates, we've seen a reduction in our flow share, meaning the amount of sewage we send into the authority as compared to other communities, which tells us, even though our rates may go up somewhat, they don't go up as much as other communities, because our reduction in flow share means we're doing a better job than those other communities in getting that extra flow out.
Great.
Any other questions or comments on this?
I don't.
Joe, just on a related topic, oh, I'm sorry, Dennis, were you about to say something?
No, you go ahead, and I then just have a comment, yeah.
On a somewhat related topic, street sweeping and stormwater drains. We've had a resident in East Milton who's inquired about the frequency of street sweeping. I think this is a resources issue, but if you could just speak to that a little bit about how often we sweep the streets, whether there's any way we can increase any frequency of that. And
I could speak to that very specifically. We, under the federal EPA, under the former guidelines, which are not changing the next go-around, is they expect that 30% of your catch basins are cleaned in every given year, which means that every basin's cleaned every 3 years, once every 3 years. In the beginning, when I first came here, we were lucky to be doing them once every 5 years. We achieved the once every 3 years 3 years ago, and at this point, we are cleaning every basin just about every other year. So we've made great inroads, but every basin does not get cleaned multiple times a year, and it does not get cleaned every year, nor is it required to. It's a waste of resource. More importantly is the way you prevent the need for cleaning basins more frequently is by minimizing the use of sands in the wintertime, which we've done. We've gone to straight salt, with the exception on steep hills where we add some sand, mostly for visibility, but somewhat for traction. So by minimizing the amount of aggregates we put down on the roadway in the wintertime, we minimize the amount of sands that get into the basins to begin with, therefore minimize the need to clean them. So we've made some great inroads in meeting those best management practices. Street sweeping, 26 weeks a year, thereabouts, when the snow ends. Last year sometime in May. Last year sometime in March, we get out there. Even before the snow was completely ended, we were starting to sweep roads on those hills pretty early on, just to get a jump on it. But once we hit the regular schedule, once the winter is over, we can expect about 26 weeks of street sweeping. The business districts, Central Business District, Adams Street, Lower Mills, Milton Hill area, and East Milton Square will be swept once a week, every week during those 26 weeks. Collector roads, the rest of Adams Street, Brook Road, Reedsdale Road, Randolph Avenue, that's ours, Pleasant Street, those major collector roads, we are sweeping once a month, every month during those 26 weeks. And every neighborhood will get swept once a year, which exceeds the expectation of the EPA permit. So that's what we do, and that's what we do on a regular basis. Now, we go into other areas that we have known trouble area for flooding, low-lying areas. We may do those more frequently, like we did when the rains this week were forecast. We'll jump into areas and just give them what we call a tickle. Go in there and give them a quick cleaning, and just to get the stuff out of the area.
So we do have a list where there's known flooding, where you do go more
Yeah,
often?
yeah,
Okay.
we know where all we know where our outfalls are, we know where our prone, vulnerable areas are. We're out there on a very regular basis. If we got a storm coming, several days before that storm is hitting, we're watching the weather. We live but for the weather. We're watching that several days beforehand, and we're out hitting all of those trouble spots.
Okay.
Not so much street, but
So you may see those-
making sure the drains are cleared, so
Correct.
Yeah.
Now,
not as much sweeping.
Welcome to New England, where you get your heaviest rains with tropical storms. When
the leaves are falling.
When the leaves are falling. There are some, it used to be, I don't know, when I was a kid, I used to love going out in the rainstorm with my raincoat on and raking the leaves in the basins, and a lot of people still do that. A lot of people may not like doing it. They still do it because they understand it's self-preservation. And there are some people whose expectation is I have a man at every single catch basin clearing the leaves all the time in a storm, and that's unreasonable. and impossible.
And we have how many street sweeping vehicles?
One street sweeper, one catch basin cleaner, and both of which were, catch basin cleaner was in the shop for at least 4 weeks this past summer, and the street sweeper was been tied up 3 different occasions for at least a week. And we have one street sweeper operator was dealing with a physical condition where he was laid up, thank God. I mean, I don't want to sound cruel, but thank God it was during the same time that the street sweeper was laid up, so we didn't lose any time. We have cross-trained on our equipment, and the vulnerability in the street sweeper is our second employee who was cross-trained on it, happened to be out on a medical disability and was out of work, on workers' comp for an extended period of time. They're both back. All 3 of them back, the street sweeper machine and the 2 people.
Okay, thanks for addressing
I
that,
just have
Joe.
a 2-part question, if you don't mind, Katie. So we have 3 meters that measure the water come into Milton, right?
That's correct.
How many meters do we have that measure the sewer that goes out?
Oh, you've asked me a question I don't know the answer to. Several. We have a map of them. I can pull them up online and show them to you. There's several. That's driven more by gravity of where they can get in, but we have several trunk lines that run through Milton, one pretty much running right down Brook Road, and one running down by Curry College, and where all of the various neighborhoods tie in, there are meters prior to us tying into the MWA trunks.
But I guess my question is, so we pay the MWRA based on the flow that goes into wherever it goes to, Deer Island.
Low in population, it's about half and half.
Are you aware of any stormwater, for example, off of roofs and that are connected into the main source?
Well, that's what our II program is all about. II is inflow,
Yeah.
roofs, catch basins, people's cellar drains, floor drains, sump pumps. That's inflow, and infiltration is a degradation in your underground piping network where the water finds its way soaking into your pipes through cracking, old age, and failure. So that's exactly what our II program is. It's exactly that. And that's what we've been doing on a regular basis year to year. And it's why we've been able to keep our flow share down, compared to other communities.
I guess, you know the way...
And you're never 100%, because I can tell you, and I'm not trying to show tell any stories out of school here, we can go and do a smoke test in a neighborhood, and go in and we can tighten up the whole system. When I say smoke test, as a way of determining if there is a likelihood or potential for a cellar drain being tied into our soil, which is against Federal Clean Water Act. And if there is, we can go in and we can order them, and we can find them to fix it. And when they do fix it, there's no assurance that 2 months from now they haven't reestablished it. What we do is on all final readings, we not only go in and make a physical reading of the water meter, that's our opportunity to look around and check for compliance. Do you have sump pumps? Where does your sewer go? Are you in fact, if you are connected to the sewer, are you in fact paying a sewer bill? And do you have any other extraneous flows like roof drains tying in?
Actually, that's good to know. So that is part of your guidelines?
It's part of our guidelines.
On
We
your-
do that on all final inspections. We're doing that as part of our checklist.
Good.
Anything else for Joe or Kathy?
That's it? Thanks, Kathy.
Kathy, thank you for coming in
Thank you very
tonight.
much.
Joseph?
Joe, thank you. And while you're here, Joe, Central Avenue is either
Getting
very
there.
close to done or It's looking good.
We painted lines last night, up until the rain started, which was around 4 o'clock this morning. We still have probably one more night. However, the safety issues that we were most concerned with have been addressed, so even if the season would have shut down with line painting today, we're safe enough to get us through spring. Contractors working on sidewalks yesterday and today. The goal, if they can work between the raindrops, is to finish sidewalks by the end of next week, then looming and seeding and infill, and then come back in the spring and landscape.
Great.
Working really well on that.
Looks good.
Bill Clark and Anne Marie had mentioned to me that there might be an opportunity, or might be a need for me to speak on town meeting articles. Should I
Yes.
stick around for that?
Yes, if you would. That's
Okay,
actually
well-
the next item on our agenda. Why don't you stay at the table, because I think we can probably cover that one fairly quickly, and we do have some other people here who... So, Joe, the article is the easement article, which is number, I believe it's 15.
15, yeah.
Okay, so taking back up number 10, which is the October special town meeting articles, Article 15, been a couple of the articles that have generated some questions already, now that the warrant is out in print. Several town meeting members have asked questions about different articles. So I'll tell you, Joe, the issue that has come up on Article 15, this is a general authorization for the board to acquire easements for sewer and water lines, for vehicle access, for sidewalks, for various things that are written in the recommendation. We've had at least 2 town meeting members inquire whether this article is intended to address the Randolph Avenue 40B project, which has not yet been filed with the Zoning Board of Appeals. But unfortunately, sometimes a question comes up and then it starts to spread and then rumors get created, and we need to address them. So since we're at a televised meeting, and maybe there's a way we can get the word out and explain a little more what this is about. The warrant committee meetings are now televised, and Bill Clark and Anne Marie and I were at that meeting, and there was a discussion about this article, but there's still questions about it. Maybe you could give us a little background on this article.
I would love to. I guess I'm never surprised where people's minds may go when understanding the ulterior motives of anything. The reality is, this is good government, this is the elimination of bureaucracy, this is efficiency. Anything that we do during the course of our work that we do, I may need to go into somebody's backyard, I may need to run a drain pipe to get an area, I may need to do something with a sewer issue. We may, from time to time, do sidewalk work, like on Central Avenue. If we don't have the cooperation of those homeowners to even do a temporary, what's called right of entry, it forces us to then secure easements. Well, if that's the case, the Board of, this article allows the Board of Selectmen to address each one of those items on a more formal basis as the need arises, as opposed to waiting 6 months before we could take the next step to secure an easement through town meeting.
Can you just give an example of what you mean by that?
Sure.
Can you give an
Great example is that this Thursday night, which is only 2 nights away, we'll be doing a public hearing, not we, Mass Highway will be doing a public hearing for the Safe Routes to School project down at the Glover School area, Brook Road to Canton Avenue intersection in that park area. There are improvements, a lot of safety improvements. It's a federal grant. It's costing us $0. But since it's federal money, it's done through the state. The state's conducting the public hearing. And all along that project, there are areas where sidewalks are going to be improved. There are going to be some slope grading of areas. There's going to be some pruning of trees, some of which is in our own right-of-way, some of which extends across the property line. Federal highway project requires a formal easement. Without the opportunity for the selectmen, when that project ultimately moves forward, we would have to wait till the next town meeting in order to do that. And quite frankly, in a 6-month period, you could lose the federal funding. So as those needs arise, or as those projects come up, it gives us the opportunity to act on them. There's another project area where we have a localized flooding problem. It seems to be emanating from the street. Solution to that problem very well might be to put a rain garden in an area in order to allow the street flooding to focus in a concentrated area, hold that water there ever so short period of time, day and a half, for that water to then soak into the ground or to move through the rest of the drain system. But it's on private property. Those types of discussions can't move forward without going to a town meeting. This article provides that efficiency that allows us to bring it in. Still requires a vote of the board. Authorization of town meeting gives this board the authority to enter into the agreement, and that the selectmen still will have the opportunity to do diligence, get all the facts, and vet the entire issues.
Through a public hearing?
If it's a taking, if it's not a cooperative abutter, and the town wants to take that easement, it requires a public hearing, and it requires an eminent domain proceeding. But a lot of times, easement's given voluntarily.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that.
I get it, yeah.
Yeah. With respect to the Randolph Ave potential 40B project, do you contemplate that there would be any need for easements on that project? I know it's kind of hard to say.
The application hasn't even been filed yet.
Right.
That's the difficulty.
We've seen preliminary stuff, 18 months ago, and based on what I saw then, the answer is no. There was nothing that they were proposing that would be, first of all, there's nothing that we would do. That would be their easement with some other private party. So that would be, it would even not even apply.
Town does not anticipate doing anything in terms of bringing in a a main or anything that would come across somebody else's property or something like that? Or?
We do it frequently. There are drain lines in town, and in the past, it required a town meeting action. There are sewer lines.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
In that same area.
With respect, though, to that project, is there a possibility that that would have to happen?
No, we have a sewer main that coincidentally runs cross-country. Some of it's on that particular property, some of it's on the backyards of those other houses along Randolph Avenue, and that sewer main has been there 50 years. In fact, we rehabilitated it just a couple of years ago, part of our II program, because it's low-lying area and it was susceptible to water getting in. So no, that's secured in an easement, but it's those types of things that when it's in the interest of the town to do, that gives us the opportunity, gives this Board of Selectmen the opportunity to do it more efficiently than wait 5-6 months down the road for town meeting. And then run the risk of town meeting, not necessarily approving it.
Right.
The language here is used in, and I don't have the exact number, but I would dare say in a great many communities across the Commonwealth. This is not unique to Milton by any sense.
I was just going to bring that point up, Joe, because Anne Marie and I had a discussion with town council about this recently, and he mentioned a couple of the towns that he represents who have gone to this within the last few years and started doing this. This would become an annual article, so that the current article, if it's approved at this town meeting, it would only apply for fiscal year 2015, the current fiscal year, and then every year, like the revolving funds, the same article would keep reappearing, and it would have to be voted every year. I guess one other option, according to John, was to do a bylaw amendment and adopt a new bylaw, but in the meantime, a lot of towns, he has told us, are taking this
Bylaw or
approach.
charter?
Oh, maybe charter.
At least bylaw.
I thought it was bylaw, but I guess we'd have to look more into that.
It depends on what the charter says.
Go down that route.
Yeah. So again, if there's any suggestion or any curiousness out there in the community that this is some sort of guise for an ulterior motive, I could just tell everybody, please, it's not that at all. It's pure efficiency. It's really good government, and I would encourage them to support it.
Okay.
And if it does get supported, it still has to come in front of this board.
Yeah, nothing would require us.
For final
except
approval,
We would just have authorization to acquire.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's the comments that, we're going to have another article, Marion McGetrick's here, the comments, and nowhere else in the warrant, in the article itself, doesn't mention specific things like the animal shelter in that case. So that leads to a lot of questions getting asked, and the more we can try to get the word out there to explain what some of this is, then at least it might eliminate some questions and make people more comfortable with what we're really talking about. Right. Joe, while you're here, the town administrator mentioned there were a couple of capital articles. Well, Amy's will be talking with us I think at Monday night's meeting, because she's going to have the water and sewer enterprise consultant there for a town meeting to speak and answer questions. So we may not want to cover those two tonight, but we do have Article 2, which is the water storage tanks. I will be recused on that, so if there's any questions that Dennis or Tom want to go over with you on that article, I know at a prior meeting was discussed, but while we have Joe here, if either of you want to have any discussion on those.
Right now?
Now we could do that. I'll step outside the room, but while we have Joe, if you want to talk about them, this would be a good opportunity.
Well, I understand the whole thing, and I understand why we need the money. I think it would be appropriate if we had 3 or 4 minutes for Joe to explain to the public what exactly is going to happen.
So, Joe, then what I'm going to do is just step outside, and I'll come back in once you're off this topic.
As simple as you explained it to us the other day.
Dennis hardly knows me, 3 or 4 minutes.
I know.
I'll try to make it up to your expectations.
I deliberately put it in a time cap.
Yeah, right.
Very complicated issue, but I think what it really boils right down to is that due to some various plumbing changes that have occurred over the past 7 years between the town of Canton and town of Milton, it results in our questionable ability to deliver water and fire protection to several hundred households in the high-lying areas, particularly in Chickatawba and the outlying areas over in the Blue Hill Reservation area. And what that essentially has done is allow us to look at our master plan and to fully understand that in order to meet those needs, we have to do 3 things. We have to provide fresh water at the right, well, 3 things, I suppose. Fresh water at the right volume and the right pressure in order to meet all those demands. And to do that, 3 physical things need to happen, and that is that the 3 water tanks that we have need to have some improvements made to them to increase the capacity and to improve the reliability, and to, quite frankly, to replace their 80-year-old age. Item 1. Item 2 is that there are plumbing questions, and what I mean by plumbing is replacement of some transmission water mains in the town of Milton that basically fortify the loop between those 3 tanks, and I'm gesturing in a circular fashion. Canton Avenue, Holland, Highland Street, up to the Chickatobit tanks where there are 2, and 1 tank on the side of Big Blue would balance the flow of water between those 2 areas. And the third item that has to happen is the installation of a pressure-reducing valve at one of those 3 meters you referenced earlier, which is meter 55, which is on Metropolitan Avenue. So what that will do collectively will have the tanks have sufficient water at the sufficient height to pressurize the system during periods of high demand. But in those outlying areas where you've heard me talk in the past, is in order to provide safe water, meaning high water quality without aged water, reduced chlorine, or elevated bacteria concerns. It needs to have a freshness, and to do that, you need to move the water through the system. The PRV valve on Metropolitan Avenue modulates, if you will, reduces pressure or increases pressure based on demand. So in periods of high demand, those tanks remain full. In periods of low demand, they cycle down and drain down somewhat, and then overnight fill back up again to meet the high demand in the morning. And by cycling, keep that water fresh. And in doing that, we are able to provide that water to those outlying areas without any degradation of water quality. And then the last element, the piping, was simply balancing that effect between the 3 tanks. The bonding request is for 5.4. I hate to say I don't have the numbers in front of me. It's $5.4 million we're looking to borrow, and in order to accomplish all 3 of those, we have gone out to bid for 2 of those items. That's the water main replacement and the PRV valve. They have come in below the engineer's estimate, and we opened those bids last week. We have a recommendation to award prepared based on the town meeting vote.
That's a good thing.
The water tank, which is the biggest number, of course, but it's actually, it's about equal to the water main replacement
Right.
number, as I recall. We have not put that out to bid because, quite frankly, there's an element where our tanks are on DCR property, and the permit conditions issued by DCR, we want to have known, just like the conversation you had with demolition of the building. We want to have those permit conditions known before we put it out to bid, because any uncertainty results in an increased cost, either on the outset or the obvious potential for change orders when the contract is awarded.
And Joe, the need for replacing the age of those tanks, just to let everybody know how old those things are and what the condition of those tanks are at this point. And
80 years old, 2 of them, the 2 on the side of Chickatobit Hill, are going to be replaced with 1. Those are beyond repair. The third, oh, thank you. My recollection was pretty accurate.
Yes, it was.
As far as the numbers, okay, thank you. Not precise, but accurate. The 2 on the side of Chickatobit both have to be replaced. The steel is totally gone. It's riveted steel. They're going to be replaced with a single tank. The one on the side of Big Blue, there was some thought that it could have been rehabilitated, and we looked at that on a life cycle basis, even though it's a little bit younger than 80 years old. It's probably 76 years old, same vintage, but it's in a little bit better quality, and it's got a little less concern for security issues than the other ones do. So a lot of the Homeland Security requirements now for protecting water supplies kick into gear in remote areas and not so much on the Big Blue tank. But on a life cycle analysis and looking at the required maintenance that would be required over the next, the bonding period, let's say 30 to 40 years, it's actually more cost-effective to replace the tanks now than it is to carry on that recurring cost over the coming years.
Joe, if we were able to make an agreement with the town of Canton, would we have avoided this cost of replacing the tanks?
I think we do have an agreement. That's kind of what is causing the
Well,
replacement.
Talking
of the
7 years
tanks.
ago. You're talking 2007?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the agreement is going to be terminated.
I guess the best way, I don't know, I wasn't here then. I could tell you that and I don't have the exact date in front of me, but the agreement that was in place for some 57 years unchallenged until 2007, when it was challenged. It put two pit vipers against each other, with they all recoiled and their fangs out. It resulted in Canton having to make substantial capital investment on their own system, coincidentally about the same number, $6-7 million on their own system to become self-sufficient, which they have done, they've completed, and in fact, the reason why we're under this revised agreement is because they want to shut off the valves, which would cripple us from those three concerns I talked about: pressure, supply, and water quality on those high elevated areas, affecting about 400 households. And since they've done that, there's no going back. Had something been approached differently in 2007 and just simply kept it status quo and maybe restructured some sort of payment rate, because I think the issue came right down to is that they felt as though they were paying, well, first off, they were paying the wholesale rate plus 10%, I think, for the 57 some odd years.
Right.
And in 2007, they went to,
Retail.
through this fight, went to a retail rate. But suddenly they were paying dramatically higher bills. Coincidentally, what they charged their customers is still less than what we were charging them, just an aside. But they wanted to have their water cheaper, and Milton didn't do that, and as a result, they made the investment. They felt it made sense to them to make their investment, become self-sufficient, get off of our retail rate, and turn off the tap. And it's not a cliche, it's where we're at.
And the tap is going to be turned off?
We have a very structured milestone within our agreement. Town meeting, we've met every milestone up to this point, which is including getting it on town meeting. We have until December. There was even some thought that perhaps town meeting may not convene in October. So we have until December 31st to have an authorization of town meeting.
Maybe that's something you should talk, because I'm not sure, again, I understand what you're talking about, but to people listening, the agreement with Canton, the fact that, well, first of all, a little history, that back in 2007 when the agreement was changed, there was an early 1950s agreement that we had with Canton. And back in the early 2000s, we had tremendous unaccounted for water, some of which we believed was coming from that sharing of water with Canton. Whether it's true or not, some of it was traced to that, and that's how the whole thing came about originally. Was let's,
Nobody had an epiphany in 2007 and said, let's shake this up. It was attributed specifically to the unaccounted for water.
Yeah.
And there was some thought that a lot of our water was lost through the Canton pipe somewhere, somehow.
Correct. So, you're right, that Canton did decide to become self-sufficient, and now they are. And like you said, they were ready to flip the switch, and it would have caused us to have the problems that we're trying to correct right now. So we're under an agreement with Canton that we just broke it about a year or so ago.
Sure, and I want people to, and I think you do too, I think you want the public to know that this is not something that just came around suddenly. I mean, this is something that's been on our radar for the past 4 years. We've been working with Canton to please don't shut it down. Let's give us some time to solve this. Commission our master plan, understand the hydraulics of our system to understand what it would mean to us. Hammer out, I think John Flynn and I spent the better part of 9 months of our lives hammering out an agreement with the town of Canton, Town Administrator Anne Marie and Bill Friel on the town of Canton's behalf, hammering it out, directly, and then the boards of selectmen ultimately accepting the agreement. So this has been something that's been several years in the works. And as a result of that agreement, it gives the town until November of 2016 to achieve very strategic milestones through the process. But come December of November of 2016, if we're not 100% complete with all of our work, be damned, they're shutting the valve off.
Right.
Have you thought about if town meeting turns this down, this article down? What happens then?
It's democracy. I fully understand that. It's incumbent upon me to make a compelling case so people at town meeting understand it, and to not leave that microphone until everybody's nodding their heads, just like you are.
Yep.
Because there is no alternative. When they will shut us down,
Right.
and when they do, we will have several hundred households compromised with the ability to shower and flush the toilets every single morning, and if, God forbid, there's a fire during high-demand periods, unable to fight fires in those neighborhoods.
Yep. I knew the answer, I just wanted you to tell the public that.
This one, I cannot mince words on. There's no diplomatic way to dance around it. This is a very serious problem. We're asking to borrow money and have the faith of town government and my department doing its work to understand that this is the most affordable, the most reasonable approach, and that we become, again, fully self-reliant on our own system. And it's an investment that's going to last hopefully more than the next 80 years.
And again, for the public to know, I mean, this is a water issue. It's not so it doesn't affect the general tax rate. You know, we're not looking for an override. We're not looking for anything like that. Nor is it going to come out of the general fund. It will have an impact on water rates.
It's going to be borne directly by the water rates. It will be borne directly by the water rate.
And I think it would be helpful if you could at least have some kind of a stab at what it might potentially do to a water rate.
Yeah, my intention is to do that. I actually had done that once before. I don't have that number off the top of my head.
Okay.
When we were running the number, we were also dealing with what's the impact of the multifamily impacts, and I hate to say it, I don't know what the clean number is.
Okay.
Having the multi-unit forgiveness in place.
Right. Okay, great.
But I will have that, obviously, for next week.
That's it, Tom?
Yeah?
Yeah,
I'm
all
fine.
set too, thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Joe.
Joe,
I know you meant.
you know who I meant, yeah.
We're all set
Yep.
this evening?
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Okay, so on to our other articles. We have Attorney Marion McGettrick here, and she's here to talk with us about Article 6. So Marion, if you'd like to come up and join us at the table.
Hey, Marion.
It's like old home night for
Marion.
former selectmen.
Yes,
First
it
Kathy
is.
Dunphy, and now Marion McGettrick.
Yes,
Thanks for waiting, Marion. We appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Interesting to be here and listen to your discussion.
So before you got here, Bill Clark, he had to run over to the planning board meeting tonight over at the MPEG studio. So he was here earlier with a map to describe the two parcels. There's a 3-acre parcel and then a 0.28-acre parcel that's here. And the difficulty with this article is that it talks about the land off the landfill access road, but nowhere in the article or in the comment is it explained that the intent of the board in submitting this article was to give us an option for the land to be used for the animal shelter, if we're able to enter into an agreement with the animal shelter at some point. And there's some moving pieces here because we have to get an MOA, a memorandum of agreement, which is in draft form. We've received the draft from the animal shelter and from Marion McGettrick a couple months ago, and it's being reviewed, and hopefully we'll be at a point soon where we'll be able to go back and forth and finalize a draft on that if we can all come to an agreement on the various points. But in the meantime, we've submitted this article because, as Bill said, the land on Randolph Ave was designated many decades ago as landfill, for use for landfill purposes. The landfill closed quite a number of years ago. There's not really a potential for landfill use in the future. So in order for us to use it for anything other than landfill, we need to redesignate the purpose as general municipal purposes.
So, you know, I can say that, first of all, I want to say thank you to the Board of Selectmen because Milton Animal League hired me in the summertime to work with them on this idea of trying to do a memorandum of understanding, because they've been working for many years on how to raise money to create an improved shelter building somewhere. And they certainly had their sights fixed on the Governor Stoughton site where they are now, but it's been moving so slowly that they've grown concerned that it's simply not going to happen. There's not going to be a resolution of how that land can be used soon enough. And so they've accepted the idea that another site might be the best choice. So they have come to the Board of Selectmen to make the proposal that the board at least consider locating a small animal shelter on the dump access road. That's the reason this article's in the warrant, because the Milton Animal League, which is a nonprofit organization that currently staffs the animal shelter in Milton, raises a lot of money every year to run it, basically keeps the operation going, and is raising money to try to build a new shelter. asked the selectmen to consider some other sites, and this site seemed to be the most viable at this time. That's not to say that you've decided to locate a shelter there. It's not to say that we've reached an understanding on a memorandum of understanding about how the Animal League would work with the town as a nonprofit to run the shelter and help fund it. But a positive vote on giving the selectmen authority over this property for municipal purposes would make it possible for you to make that choice to use about an acre of this 3.72 acre site for the shelter. So we appreciate the opportunity to talk about the needs of the animal shelter. I think people have heard about it off and on for years now, but if people aren't familiar with it, the current shelter, it was built by volunteers. It's a cinder block building. It's in deplorable condition, but we've been anticipating the possibility of building a new one for years. And the League has raised a great deal of money and has promises of substantial funding. But the town would have to select a site and agree that it would make the site available so that the League could raise the money to build a building. So it would be a pretty good gift from the Milton Animal League, and they would also agree to enter into an understanding with the town that, more than an understanding, they'd actually sign some kind of operating agreement where they would agree to do certain things to run the shelter as well, and the costs would be estimated and known. Everyone would agree what the town paid for and what the League was going to pay for. So a lot of the ingredients are in place, but there's no site. This vote, if it's positive, will make it possible for the selectmen to decide at a future time if this could be a site for a shelter. It's not going to determine that it will be the shelter site. Much as we would, having worked with the League now for several months, much as everybody would like to have this all decided, we know that it hasn't been decided yet. But we would certainly appreciate that town meeting support this vote. There's really no reason not to. This land was purchased in 1954 to be used for the landfill. And when the town purchases land for a purpose like that and takes a town meeting vote, to use it for another purpose, there has to be another town meeting vote. Well, the landfill no longer exists. So this land should be taken out of that landfill purposes and put into general municipal use. And the normal way to do that is have it under the Board of Selectmen until some other town board decides perhaps that they want to have control over it. So I don't think there's anything that unusual about it. I don't know what other uses the selectmen may have in mind, and maybe they don't have any in mind at this point for the other acreage that would remain, even if the shelter were located here. So I think the discussion, hopefully at least, if it occurs at town meeting, will focus on the possibility of making this possible for the possible location for the animal shelter. And then in general, just taking a vote that makes sense to put land into a category of available for use, which it really isn't right now.
Right.
Yes.
So that's my summary, and I appreciate you letting me come in and talk
To some
about it.
extent, it's a housekeeping article, really, to make it possible for future action by the board.
Exactly. So thank you. And we'll be probably speaking at town meeting as well, so, and anything we can do to help the selectmen
Mary,
with
you
this.
suggested, when we talked over the weekend, you suggested maybe sending a letter to town meeting members, because even though it's late, the town clerk can still send correspondence out to town meeting members by email. I don't know if it reaches all town meeting members, but presumably it reaches a good deal of town meeting members, which would just be a matter of us drafting up a letter explaining essentially what's just been said tonight, that that's the purpose of this. Having a copy of the letter available on the table at town meeting as town meeting members are walking into the room.
That would be a good idea, yeah.
So we could prepare a draft, send it to you to take a look at.
I'd be happy to do that, yeah.
Add any comments to it, and
Sure.
and then ask the town clerk to hopefully get it out by Friday, if we can get it to her timely enough.
And I guess it's no secret that we have had a couple of public meetings with the abutters in that area.
True, and the letter should probably mention that the potential for animal shelter in that area has been discussed with the neighbors, and I think I know the golf course raised some questions or concerns. I think generally speaking, most of the other, Mr. O'Neill raised some concerns and questions as well. But many of the other residents in the
Did not
Quarry
appear to
Lane,
have
the other
an
side
issue
streets,
with it, yes.
did not raise concerns.
I mean, the League wants to make it clear that the shelter Size hasn't been determined, except that it will be, probably under 5,000 square feet. But the design will be such that it will be soundproofed, that it would be as energy efficient as it possibly could be. And these shelters, this type of shelter these days is designed so that the animals actually can be inside and exercised inside if necessary. But you like to locate an animal shelter in a place where dogs can be taken out for a walk. That's why it's a good location.
Right.
It's relatively distant from, because of the topography and everything, the location, if it were near the beginning of the access road, sort of at the bottom of a hill, it's relatively quiet anyway, and it's fairly far from other residences. And because of the soundproofing characteristic, I don't know how there could be any impact on the golf course operation, for example. You wouldn't be able to hear it. And even more important, I think, to the neighbors, the expectation is that they wouldn't be able to hear it. And we've talked about this, or when I was still in the Board of Selectmen, we talked about it up at Governor Stoughton. Same thing, a new shelter would be built in a different way than the existing shelter. And in general, the aim is to kind of not know it's there. That the building should be designed so that it's, doesn't stand out, you don't really see it most of the time, and the animals can be there without really causing a disturbance.
There was one town meeting member who questioned whether the site might potentially be used for composting or other landfill-related purposes, and that hasn't been, I don't know if it's been considered, but that hasn't happened to date, and it's been quite a number of years since the landfill is closed. And there are houses that are right near this area, so obviously odors and smells from composting would be an issue. And
Well, there's, I think you've talked about taking a relatively small portion of this site, maybe an acre. It would leave almost 3 acres, and there certainly may be other uses the town would have.
the town, when we were talking about the housing production plan, we did designate the land off of Randolph Ave that's owned by the town as potential.
Potential, right.
So,
And I said it before, Marion, I've been in touch with the owner of Granite Links many times. And I think they're the ones that you really have to be concerned about.
Right, and what is the concern that you've heard? Because I wasn't at the original meetings, I
Noise.
wasn't involved till the
It's
middle
the
of the
noise
summer.
when you're in your backswing.
Right. So, I mean, I don't know what noise there would be with a shelter designed this way, other than if you're taking a dog for a walk or something like that. I mean, this
That's
is
no more
normal.
noise than you'd have from a
I guess
normal dog
the
in any
intention would be
Right.
not to do anything that would be any different from residential use where people have pets. But, and in fact, the current shelter isn't terribly noisy. I mean, it's terribly crowded, and
But what they have asked me to tell you is just to make sure that you keep them in the loop at every stage along the way. They want to be involved. They want to be involved with the
and
design.
they are abutters and neighbors, so they will be, I mean, I can't speak for the town, but it's quite clear to me that in any process, they would be in the loop. And I can only speak, as the attorney representing the Milton Animal League, but I know that they want to work with everybody, so if anyone wants to meet with me or meet with the group at any point, we're willing to do that. I'd say that at this meeting, so that everybody's aware of it. It's a very interesting group. There are new people who weren't in there, 5 years ago. They're just people who care a lot about animals. I mean,
Oh, it's great. And
And
I mean, personally, I would be supporting it. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
you don't want to get into it and then have a lawsuit that's going to hold you up for many years.
right. I understand there've been issues. I mean, I was on the Board of Selectmen, we have a long history with Quarry Hills. Great deal of difficulty, certainly with the wind turbine issue. That's a very different kind of issue from this. I mean, this is a really small facility, and if people are worried about it, then we want to make sure we can reassure them. So the best thing I can tell you is, let's keep the lines of communication open. If you're talking
Absolutely.
to somebody casually, they don't have to talk to me, they could talk to another member of the Animal League if they'd rather, but we're happy to sit down and talk to them. And I think everything is going to be done, if this ever happens, to create a building that will not intrude on anything in its surrounding area. So maybe there are new technologies, 6 months or a year from now that we'll find out about that make it even better. But right now,
I don't think dogs will be barking any different.
you know, I mean, what we're not anticipating is that we're designing a, you know, a simple shell of a building with a large pen outside where animals will be day and night barking and disturbing the peace, basically. That's not something that anybody wants, and I don't think the Board of Selectmen would allow such a shelter to be built for the town. But we'll keep working in any way you think we should. So, you know, if you have access to someone at Corey Hills, I don't play golf, so I'm not up there, although I like to go up there to eat, but...
I think it might be worthwhile having a community meeting up there with all the neighbors.
Well, you know, this will all happen. I just don't want
At the
to I don't want to, the Board of Selectmen hasn't decided yet whether to do this, so I feel a little uncomfortable saying, oh, yeah, sure, we'll be there and let's have the meeting. We will be happy to do that if the board decides to go forward, and if we can reach an agreement as to what the working relationship will be, and if the money is there to do this project. So, but yes, that would be a fine idea and a nice way to do it. And I think whatever concerns there are, if we can talk about them face-to-face with all of the neighbors for the site, I think that we can work out what the resolution might be to any concerns that are out there. So let's just look at it that way, and we're going to tell you that again if we come in to talk to you about the MOU, so, because I know the selectmen don't need another difficult issue to deal with. I'm hoping that this will be a good one.
Well, that's our second step, the MOU. The first one is getting the landfill designation.
That's right.
Changed. So.
Exactly. So, thank you.
Thank you,
All right,
Mary.
Marion, thank you. Thank you for waiting. Bill Clark is back. Bill, did you want to add anything else to the discussion, or are you? No. Any follow-up questions from Bill's comments earlier on Article 6?
No.
Okay, we've voted to submit these articles, obviously. We have not voted to, at least on some of them, we haven't voted to support yet. Do we want to take a vote to recommend Article 6? Or to support the warrant committee's recommendation on Article 6?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous. Okay, what about Article 15, the easements, since we discussed that one as well? Do we want to
I'll move that one.
take a vote to support it?
To support it, yeah.
Okay. Second, Tom?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Any
It makes
discussion?
sense, yeah.
Discussion? Then all in favor of supporting Article 15?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous. Okay, we have 16 articles in the warrant. Some of these are planning board articles. One of them is a library trustees article. Are there any others that anyone would like to discuss tonight? I would suggest that 3 and 4 we put off until Monday night. Those are the water and sewer enterprise funds, and we'll have the town accountant available Monday night.
We got the sign bylaw.
Yeah, we did co-sponsor both of them with the planning board. That's 7 and 8.
Then you have the Article 11, which is in my neighborhood, the planned unit development at St. Pius. I would,
I think, is there a recommendation on that one yet? I thought that, was the public hearing process from the planning board concluded? I think it may have.
they have no recommendation
They
at this
have.
time.
All right.
What was that, Bill?
They're in support of it.
The PUD?
Yes.
Okay.
Planning board. So the warrant committee, I don't think has voted. Have they voted it, Bill? Do you
I
know?
don't know. I know the planning board voted unanimously to support it.
Bill, do you want to come up and join us at the table so people can hear you?
The planning board voted unanimously to support the St. Pius reuse. I know that we've
I think I
stated,
did see that on TV now that you mentioned it. I saw that.
we stated that to the warrant committee too.
And I believe the planning board also, 7 and 8, support the 2 sign articles.
They did support those.
Okay, so do we want to vote either, we could take 7 and 8, we could take the plan unit development, which is 11. The master plan implementation committee is 13. We've already voted to submit it. We should consider voting that one tonight, if everyone's comfortable.
Yeah.
I'll move to support 7 and 8.
Seven and 8, I was at the warrant committee meeting where this one was presented, and there were some changes made by the warrant committee to emphasize that it's exterior signs. There was a discussion about interior signs, so they did make an important change there. There was a really good discussion at the warrant committee on this article.
I'll second that,
Okay.
7 and 8.
Warrant Committee had no recommendation on Article 8 at that time. Do you know, Bill, if they've voted a recommendation on Article 8? You're not the Warrant Committee expert, but it's the residential signs.
I don't know what the
Residential and temporary.
warrant committee did, but I know that the planning board
planning board
voted in
did.
full support.
Warrant Committee might be voting it Monday night. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to support Articles 7 and 8. Any discussion on them? I will report what, there was a resident, a town meeting member, who raised some questions about Article 8, and specifically the definition of signs. And the planning board's view was that she had raised some good points, but that those could be addressed at a later date through a potential future town meeting article, which seemed reasonable. Then, if no further discussion, all in favor of supporting Articles 7 and 8?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, unanimous. Article 11, the planned townhouse development, planned unit townhouse development.
I'll move to approve Article 11.
Second?
To support it, sorry.
Any discussion? This is like a good development.
This is a great development
Yeah.
between
Presentation of it was
Curry
good.
College and the Fairmont Housing Development.
Yeah, plus it uses the historic building that's there. It's,
The design looks very nice.
Plus we get 4 affordable?
4 affordables, 60-foot setbacks, retaining the front wall, retaining as much vegetation as possible, mature vegetation, putting in new gardens in the back.
There's a lot of neighborhood support for this one as well.
There's a
Neighborhood.
lot of neighborhood support.
And I will say that Ned Corcoran and Jack Colley,
Dolly,
did a wonderful job with their presentation to the neighborhood.
They had one for town meeting members, too. It was I couldn't go to it. There was a conflict that night. Did anyone go to it? It's probably the same one that they made to the planning board that has been shown on TV. Okay, if no other discussion, then all in favor of supporting Article 11?
Aye.
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 Unanimous. And 13 is the Master Plan Implementation Committee that was revised before it was submitted with some comments from us, so I'm not sure we have much discussion on this one, but would anyone like to
Makes
make a
sense to,
motion?
yeah, I'll make a motion to support Article 13.
yes. Second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. We haven't talked about Article 14, the fire station renovation appropriation. The recommendation on this one, the committee did request an appropriation from the warrant committee, and the warrant committee, because it's early in the fiscal year, was concerned about the fact that the budget's been approved in May. There really wasn't a solid funding source for this. So the recommendation of the warrant committee is for town meeting to authorize the Board of Selectmen to accept grants in order to take on this feasibility study, and to authorize the selectmen with input from the Fire Space Needs Committee to determine the scope of any restriction of a grant. There's a lot of bullet points here as to what the feasibility study might entail. The bullet points actually seem broader than what both Steve Morash, who's the chairman of the committee, and Fire Chief Jack Grant have told us is what they really envision the feasibility study encompassing. They view that as a next step to build on what their initial
Right.
efforts were, and it would have they've said that they want the consultant to take part in public meetings. They want the consultant to continue the discussion of renovation versus completely new construction. They want the consultant to look at locations. They understand that there's issues with the East Milton former library site. The warrant committee has recommended no appropriation, but that gifts be accepted for this purpose. And the fire department has a gift account that they would like to use to fund this feasibility study. They have an estimate of somewhere between $35,000 and I think $95,000 or $100,000. They have several estimates.
So having said that, I would make a motion to support Article 14.
Yeah, I will second that. I do want to make sure it kind of stays on track. I don't think we're anywhere close to building fire stations right now.
Right.
So that I agree with a lot of it, let's look at space needs, let's look at locations, and those kinds of things, but I don't want it to morph into plans for 3 fire stations at this point. I don't think it's way premature.
Yeah, I agree. And also, in checking with the outside financial consultant, Lisa Dickinson,
I did see that.
did get the debt schedules, and the
Right.
school building project debt is,
2029 is when everything finally drops off. So.
yeah, and it doesn't dramatically fall until 2026. So we have the DPW buildings that are in need of a lot of, there's a lot of work that's needed there too. So between the fire stations and the DPW, we're looking at some significant capital expenditures, but the ability to
I did play
borrow
around.
for it is,
I played around a little bit with the debt schedule, and it would require a home rule petition, but you could potentially, by saying, okay, if you want to set 2015 as a bench water mark for the over the levy limit debt, and then put some of the savings that you had year by year after that into a stabilization fund. By 2022, you could probably fund about $20 million worth of, and keep your bench water 2015 level.
by 2022. So it
Right.
shaves off a few years, but
Shaves
not-
off a few years, yeah.
doesn't dramatically move it up.
Because you'd stockpile about $2 million of, it's about $2.8 million at 2015, and it starts dropping, not a tremendous amount, but enough that, if you were able to take that savings and basically, keep it in a stabilization fund, then you could potentially do it around there.
And again, there's competing needs, the DPW and
Oh,
the
yeah.
fire stations.
Sure.
So- Plus,
Sure.
your favorite topic, Tom, the roads.
Sure.
We have a lot of capital needs there, so I agree. I would like this to remain focused on the preliminary items, and maybe we need to
Specify that.
consider whether there's any modification we'd want to make to this recommendation. Because it does talk, one of the bullet points, design a construction schedule for 3 stations. The other issue that the warrant committee highlights in their comment is one that Steve Morash and the Fire Needs Committee mentioned when they were here a few months ago, which was that their recommendation was before the buildings eventually are built, the issue of ambulance service, emergency medical services should be considered. And,
I think we're far enough down the road, if that ever does come, I mean, we haven't designed anything yet. It really is. I don't think it really has to happen.
No, and many people, and myself included, would view that as a settled issue at this point, unless a real proposal comes in. There's been talk at different times about ambulance service, but right now, there's a long-term contract with Fallon Ambulance in the town that runs through 2017, I believe.
Right.
And the practice since the early 1990s, maybe sooner than that, has been that the fire department does not provide an EMS service. So in order to consider that down the road at some point, there'd need to be, and I think Chief Grant and Steve Morash understand this, that there would need to be a full financial analysis of all the pros and cons. The billing system issue that hasn't made this
The legislative-
something that could even really be considered,
Yeah.
which is tied up in the legislature. So there's significant issues that would have to be worked out in order for that to be considered at some point. But there's no proposal before the board. There's no proposal that's been made. So while the Fire Needs Committee can ask that be addressed at some point, there's no proposal to consider at the present time.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it should be studied at some point. I don't think it's been studied yet, like you said.
Well, not for a long time, anyway.
Right. And things change over a period of time. But it has to be fully vetted, and you really have to consider the full cost of providing that service in town.
So I think someone moved this one and seconded it.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess the only question is, should we consider whether some of the bullet points are a little further down the road than what I think all of us are envisioning, and maybe there would need to be, should we consider whether we want to offer a friendly amendment on this one?
Yeah, I think certainly the last 4 bullet points are concept plans, design, construction schedules, construction total project cost estimates. I don't see those as...
Well, I guess they have to do the concept plans to get a construction, to get prices on them.
That's the thing.
Yeah, well, why are prices even necessary at
If
this
we're that
point?
far out in terms of being able to do anything, the pricing information is probably not...
It's going to be
It'll be
stale by the
updated.
time you have a...
It's going to be double, yeah, by the time we
Right.
build them.
Right. But
well,
I mean, the top bullets, I
Yes.
definitely agree with.
Well, should we vote? Should we vote it tonight, or should we defer it until Monday night?
I would say till Monday night, Katie, just so we can read this again.
I forget which of you made the motion.
Dennis made it, I
You made-
seconded.
Yeah.
Do we want to entertain a friendly amendment to, I'm trying to think procedurally, how we would, I guess you could withdraw the motion.
Yeah, I'll make,
It's been seconded, but
so I make a motion to withdraw the motion?
you can just withdraw it.
You just went.
I'll just withdraw the motion.
Yeah, maybe we should take a few more days to consider the scope of this recommendation, and whether there might even be some wording changes that we want to recommend to the warrant committee, and see whether they would accept it. We voted Article 15. Article 16, the special purpose fund, I think we want to have Amy Dexter available for that, and she'll be available Monday night. I would suggest we defer that one, because she was getting some additional information, just by way of background, to have available in case there are questions on Article 16, and that's obviously going to be probably not coming up the first night, assuming we'll be there more than one night. We skipped over Article 1, that's the eminent domain article. We're all pretty comfortable with that one. Do we want to take a vote on it? We voted to submit it, and we've
Motion to,
had a lot of discussion about this.
make a motion to support Article 1.
Second.
Eminent domain.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, unanimous. We miss any?
I don't think so.
Any others we could,
Aye.
good night, Bill. Any others we could take up, sorry? Any others we can take up Monday night?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. On to number 11, which is the MPEG access contract comment period. When we voted this at our prior meeting, we inadvertently left out of the motion closing the comment period.
Okay, move to close the comment period for the extension of the agreement between the town of Milton and MPEG Access, Inc. on Friday, November 7, 2014.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain.
Abstain? Okay. 301. Number 12 is to set a closing date for the 2015 annual town meeting warrant.
Move to approve dated January 5, 2015, as the closing date for the acceptance of articles for consideration by the 2015 May annual town meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The town administrator's report.
No.
Okay, I have no report under the chair's report. Does anyone have anything to report tonight?
I don't think
Nothing
so.
to report.
Citizen speak response? Future agenda items? Then if none for the moment, we will move to enter executive session to release the executive session meeting minutes and to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property, 0 Central Avenue, believing that having these discussions in open session would have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the body, and to return to open session to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mr. Hurley?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay, we are now in executive session.